November 1944. The Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The trees stand like blackened sentinels, their skeletal branches clawing at a sky choked with smoke and winter mist. Beneath the canopy, where sunlight has not touched earth in weeks, the ground itself seems to breathe, exhaling the metallic scent of blood, cordite, and rotting pine. Here, in this forsaken stretch of woodland along the German-Belgian border, men do not fight. They endure. They wait. They disappear into the earth as though the forest itself is consuming them, one frozen body at a time. In a shallow crater barely 3 feet deep, a single American soldier lies motionless. His name is Private First Class Francis S. Currey, though in 11 days, the Germans will come to know him only as Der Geist, the ghost. His rifle rests against the lip of the crater. His breath comes slow, controlled, invisible in the frigid air. He does not move. He does not speak. He watches. This is the Hürtgen, a meat grinder that has already devoured entire battalions, a place where the U.S. Army's doctrine of rapid maneuver and overwhelming firepower has shattered against the ancient, unyielding roots of German soil. The forest is a labyrinth of bunkers, minefields, and pre-sighted artillery zones. Every trail is a kill zone. Every clearing, a grave. The Americans have learned, at terrible cost, that here the old rules do not apply. Here, survival belongs not to the bold, but to the patient, to the silent, to those who can become part of the landscape itself. Francis Currey understood this truth before his commanders did. The German Wehrmacht soldiers defending the Hürtgen were not the desperate conscripts of a collapsing regime. They were veterans, hardened men of the 275th and 344th Infantry Divisions, soldiers who had survived the Eastern Front, who had learned to read the forest like a language, who knew that, in these trees, defense held every advantage. They had constructed a network of log and earth bunkers so cunningly concealed that American reconnaissance often walked within yards of them, without knowing. They had zeroed their mortars on every approach, their machine guns interlocking fields of fire that turned the forest floor into a death trap. They expected the Americans to do what Americans always did, advance with noise, with tanks, with the arrogant confidence of industrial superiority. What they did not expect was silence. What they did not expect was a single man who could vanish into the woods like smoke, who could wait for hours without moving, who could kill without sound and disappear before the body was discovered. Currey's method was devastatingly simple. He did not patrol. He did not assault. He hunted. Each morning, before dawn, he would slip forward from the American lines, moving with a patience that seemed inhuman. He would find a position, a crater, a fallen log, a depression in the earth, and he would become part of it. Then he would wait. The silent shift, he called it, though he rarely spoke of it at all. A shifting of weight so gradual that even the frost on his uniform did not crack. A control of breath so complete that no vapor betrayed his presence. And when a German patrol moved past, when a machine gun crew rotated positions, when a soldier stepped from a bunker to relieve himself in the cold, Currey would fire once. Always once. The shot would echo through the trees, indistinguishable from the sporadic crack of sniper fire that haunted the Hürtgen day and night. By the time the Germans realized one of their own had fallen, Currey would be gone, already moving to his next position, already settling into his next silent vigil. The official after-action report from the 30th Infantry Division, dated December 3, 1944, records the results in clinical language. PFC Currey, operating independently forward of friendly lines, confirmed elimination of 309 enemy combatants over an 11-day period, November 21st through December 1st methodology, precision rifle fire, delayed egress, area denial through psychological effect. But the numbers do not capture what happened in those woods. They do not capture the growing dread among the German defenders, the whispered rumors of a demon in the trees, the way men began to refuse to leave their bunkers, even when ordered. One captured German lieutenant, interrogated by the 30th Division's intelligence section, spoke of ein man, der nicht existiert, a man who does not exist. We would find our sentries dead, he said, his voice flat with exhaustion, shot through the head or heart. Always when we thought the area was secure. always when we believed ourselves alone. We began to fear the silence more than the artillery. This was the transformation that no strategist had predicted. The Hürtgen Forest, designed to neutralize American material advantage, had instead created the conditions for a new kind of warfare, one that belonged not to divisions or battalions, but to the individual, to the hunter. In the suffocating closeness of those trees, where tanks could not maneuver and artillery could not see, where radios crackled with static and maps dissolved into meaningless abstractions, Francis Currey became something the Germans had not encountered since the trench raiders of the First World War, a soldier who operated entirely alone, who answered to no timetable but his own patience, who killed with a craftsman's precision and vanished like morning fog. His rifle became a kind of talisman among the men of his company. It was a standard-issue M1 Garand, the same weapon carried by a million other American soldiers, but in Currey's hands it seemed to possess an almost supernatural accuracy. The wood stock was scarred and dark with the oil of his palms. The barrel, meticulously cleaned each night, gleamed even in the perpetual twilight of the forest. He loaded each clip himself, testing the tension of the spring, ensuring that the 8th round would eject with that distinctive ping only when he was already moving, already gone. The rifle was not merely a tool. It was a promise, a guarantee that somewhere in those woods, death was waiting with infinite patience. By the 8th day, the German command had begun rotating entire squads out of the sectors where Currey operated, marking them as contested zones on their tactical maps, a designation previously reserved for areas under direct assault. They doubled their sentries. They forbade movement during daylight. They fired randomly into the underbrush, wasting precious ammunition on shadows and fear. And still, each morning, another body would be found, another position abandoned, another whispered story of the ghost who walked through walls. On the 11th day, December 1st, 1944, Currey did not return to the American lines at dawn as he usually did. The men of his company assumed the worst, that the forest had finally claimed him, that the odds had caught up, that even ghosts must die. But at 1,400 hours, he emerged from the trees half a mile south of his last known position, walking slowly, his rifle slung across his back. He reported to his company commander without expression. "Sector clear," he said. They pulled back during the night. Intelligence later confirmed that the 275th Division had withdrawn 2 full companies from the Hürtgen's southern approach, consolidating their lines and abandoning positions they had held for weeks. The cost of those 11 days was recorded in different ledgers. The German casualty reports, fragmentary and incomplete, list 309 men as killed or missing in actions attributed to Einzelner Scharfschütze, lone sniper. The American records note that Private First Class Francis S. Currey accomplished this while suffering from trench foot, operating on an average of 2 hours of sleep per night, and subsisting almost entirely on care rations and captured German bread. The bread, he would later say, was the only part of the experience he regretted. Tasted like sawdust and bitterness, he wrote in a letter home that December. But I suppose that's what they were feeding their hope on. Sawdust and bitterness. The symbolism was not lost on the men who served with him. While German soldiers in the Hürtgen were receiving reduced rations, 300 grams of bread per day, ersatz coffee made from acorns, meat perhaps twice a week, American supply lines, even in that hellish forest, maintained a flow of food that seemed almost obscene by comparison. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, coffee that actually tasted like coffee. The material abundance of American logistics was not merely a military advantage. It was a philosophical statement. It said, we can afford to feed our soldiers, well, even in the worst places on earth. We do not ask them to fight on empty stomachs and hollow promises. Francis Currey carried that abundance into the forest with him, not in his stomach, for he ate little during those 11 days, but in the confidence it bred, in the knowledge that behind him stood an industrial civilization that could replace every bullet he fired, every meal he missed, every rifle that jammed or boot that wore through. The Germans had no such confidence. They fought knowing their supply lines were collapsing, that their homeland was being bombed into rubble, that every bullet expended was one less bullet between them and defeat. They fought with the courage of desperation, but desperation is a poor teacher of patience. And in the Hürtgen, patience was everything. When Francis Currey was finally pulled from the line on December 3, 1944, not because his mission was complete, but because his company commander feared he would literally die of exposure if he spent one more night in those woods, he carried with him a reputation that would follow him for the rest of the war. Soldiers who had never met him spoke his name. German intelligence marked him in their reports. And in the Hürtgen Forest, in those sectors where he had hunted, the Germans moved differently. They hesitated. They feared the silence. They had learned that the Americans could do more than overwhelm with numbers. They could do more than crush with steel. They could, when necessary, become invisible. They could become death itself, waiting in the cold with the patience of stone. This is the truth that the Hürtgen Forest taught, written in blood and silence across 11 days in November 1944, that freedom does not only march forward with banners and drums. Sometimes it lies motionless in a frozen crater, breathing slowly, waiting for the perfect moment. Sometimes it speaks in a single rifle shot that echoes through empty trees. Sometimes it is not the roar of tanks or the thunder of bombers, but the quiet, relentless presence of one man who refuses to be anything but patient. 309 Germans fell to that patience. 309 men who expected noise and fury, who prepared for the American way of war they had been taught to counter, and who instead met something older, something colder, something that did not announce itself until it was already too late. In the end, Francis Currey received the Medal of Honor, not for the Hürtgen, but for actions later that December during the Battle of the Bulge, where he would again display the same impossible courage, the same willingness to stand alone against overwhelming odds. The 11 days in the forest were noted in his citation, but only briefly. The official record does not linger on the psychological warfare, on the terror he inflicted simply by existing, on the way he transformed a defensive quagmire into a hunting ground. But the men who served with him remembered, and the Germans who survived him remembered. They remembered that in the darkest forest of the war, where every advantage seemed to belong to the defender, an American soldier had proven that the greatest weapon is not firepower or numbers, but the willingness to become nothing, to shed every comfort, every certainty, every human need for warmth and companionship, and in that nothingness, to become utterly lethal. The Hürtgen Forest still stands, though the bunkers have long since collapsed, and the minefields have been cleared. The trees have grown back. The earth has healed. But beneath the soil, if you know where to look, you can still find them. The spent casings, the fragments of bone, the rusted remnants of a war fought tree by tree, crater by crater, breath by breath. And if you stand very still in that forest in the cold and the silence, you might understand what those German soldiers felt in November of 1944. You might understand what it means to be hunted by a ghost who carries a rifle and the patient, terrible certainty of American abundance at his back.